Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Spongebob-Lematic cast. Today we are doing episode 9. Now, I will say that there are 20 episodes in season 1, so we're almost at the halfway point here. This one consists of 9A Nature Pants as well as 9B Opposite Day. Now, to start with Nature Pants here, it's written by Paul Tibbett, Mark O'Hare, and Peter Burns, storyboarded by Paul Tibbett and Mark O'Hare.
Yeah, a couple good episodes for this one. I feel like they're not super popular in terms of like some of the other heavy hitters of this season, but I mean, I think it just kind of goes to show how good this first season was that these are still pretty solid episodes.
Yeah, they're not bad in any way. There's definitely memorable moments in them, but I don't think they're making anyone's top 5 lists.
No, for sure.
But even still, they're good episodes. They are entertaining. Nature Pants specifically does have some little mimetic bits in it that
Oh,
have
for sure.
become popular. But, as I said, it's really not the episode itself, it's more bits of the episode. But to get right into it, we open with something that's kind of interesting, a little bit out of character of how SpongeBob normally is. He's at work and he starts just kind of daydreaming about like the freedom and whimsy of jellyfish. Like he's seeing the Krabby Patties and he's imagining in his head that like they're becoming jellyfish and they're flying out the window, and he's just kind of sitting there dozing off into his own little world. Meanwhile, Mr. Krabs comes in because he's burning it and a fire is starting,
Well, he's
and
burning as well. Like his face is like on the stove as well.
Mr. Krabs, he basically runs away from the stove. SpongeBob, he runs over to Mr. Krabs and is like, "What do we do?" He's like, "Here, use this," and he gives him a fire extinguisher. But SpongeBob, he doesn't use it. He throws it at the fire and makes the fire worse.
It just throws it and it explodes into fire. And then this whole opening bit, I don't remember it at all, but it's really funny. So he does that. Then a firefighter just comes through the like kitchen door of the Krusty Krab going wee woo, and then like and then turns on the fire hose, but instead of spraying the grill, starts filling SpongeBob up because he's a sponge, you see, and he starts filling up like and gets like 3 times his size full of water, and then he just plops down on the grill, and then the fireman and Mr. Krabs like both go hooray, and like that. It's like such a weird sequence of events, but it's really funny, and I did not remember it at all before rewatching this.
I do really like there's a little nuance to it as well, where like when SpongeBob throws the fire extinguisher, like after it makes the fire bigger, Mr. Krabs doesn't say anything, but he just silently stares at SpongeBob with a look of disapproval.
Yeah.
Like as though like he cannot, like as though he's like, you should know better.
It's like not freaking out that obviously the fire got way worse, but just
It's
like
more so just
disappointed.
surprised in an angry way that that even is something that happened.
Yeah. But then yeah, after that, Mr. Krabs has to scrape SpongeBob off of the grill because because he falls on the grill, he like the water drains out of him and he becomes like a little teeny tiny. So Mr. Krabs has to scrape him off the grill with a spatula and take him to his office. Where he mentions that this is the 4th time this week that he has had to scrape SpongeBob off of something, which is just a little, I don't know, a little weird mention. And then SpongeBob tells Mr. Krabs that he wants to give up his life and go live as a jellyfish.
So what he says, kind of specifically, is that he wants to return to nature and like leave. Essentially, his description is very similar to urban life, where he's talking about metal, steel, large buildings, and it kind of sounds like at this point what he just means is returning to nature. But we will see he does literally mean becoming a jellyfish. And Mr. Krabs, he's very dismissive at first. Like he's not listening to SpongeBob, but then when SpongeBob finally gets that out, he just kind of starts laughing at him. And so it leads to SpongeBob. SpongeBob leaves work in the middle of the day just to prove a point because he's like, I can absolutely exist in nature. Which again, it's really weird to have SpongeBob have this strong of a feeling about something to the extent that he's willing to blow off work.
Yeah. Well, he leaves work, he throws his hat on the ground. Mr. Krabs is aghast at this. And then we cut to the front of SpongeBob's house where he is giving away his possessions to his neighbors. He gives he gives Squidward a can opener, and Squidward's just obviously very sarcastically dismissive of it. Patrick is in tears at this point. He says, "Are you sure you want to give me this mayonnaise?" and these old phone books. He's just giving him the weirdest stuff from his house.
And at that point as well, Sandy shows up and basically asks what's going on, and she gets clued into. SpongeBob basically tells them like he's going to go live in nature with the jellyfish, but before he does that, he gives his jellyfishing net to Patrick, which is important. That's going to come back later. And there's this whole exchange that happens as SpongeBob's running away because SpongeBob like strips and then runs off to Jellyfish Fields. And the whole exchange here is he took off his pants. I'll give him a week. I'll give him 11 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's important to note the episode 9A is 11 minutes long.
Yep.
And what's more after that, the way this exchange ends, so Patrick and Sandy, not Patrick, Squidward and Sandy walk off and leave Patrick just sitting there. And then Patrick just screams to the sky, like, Patrick, Stad!
Yeah, Patrick is a mess this episode. It's actually really funny to see his whole like he kind of has like a weird off-screen arc in this episode, which actually is pretty interesting to go through. But yeah, he's just inconsolable at this point about his best friend leaving. But yeah, that one bit, just to go back a second, I'll give him 11 minutes, but I don't think I ever noticed that as a kid. But that is a really, because I just like always thought of it as like, oh, a very small amount of time. But yeah, no, it is just the length of the episode, which is a funny little like kind of fourth wall joke.
I mean, I feel like during normal viewing, it wouldn't be as easy to catch because you would think of a show as being in a 30-minute block. You wouldn't necessarily calculate out in your head, like when you account for commercials, that's 11 minutes per segment. But yeah, it is exactly 11 minutes, and that's why they had him say that amount of time. In lore, it's more than 11 minutes in less than a week, so they're actually both wrong. But outside of lore, 11 minutes is just right.
Yep.
So SpongeBob, he does end up going to Jellyfish Fields, which was his whole plan. He tries to be a jellyfish, and so this is the moment where like it becomes very clear that he meant that in a literal sense and not in a metaphorical, like I'm going to return to nature kind of sense.
Yeah, not like a
Because some
hippie
people will
sense,
say,
like an actual like he's like a wolfkin sense.
because people will say like live like the animals, live in nature, return to nature thing. Like people say things like that. But no, he's literally trying to emulate jellyfish. Like he's just watching what they do. He's trying to speak to them. Like he sees them eat grass, and then he tries to eat grass. Which, fun fact, don't try to do that because for whatever reason, grass makes humans throw up, even though it doesn't make some other animals throw up. I don't know what specifically it is, but it will make you throw up. He tries to handshake a jellyfish, and he's like, "Buzz, buzz, buzz the word," and he gets stung because they don't have hands; they just have stingers. And it's basically just a bunch of little misadventures there until he sees Patrick and Sandy having a picnic, and the picnic is staged to try and remind SpongeBob of what he's missing and get him to come home. And there's an important thing I feel about this where someone took this scene and its lip flaps of like Patrick trying to like get SpongeBob back after he ran away, and they redubbed it to use the Naruto track of Naruto confronting Sasuke and trying to get him to come back to the village. And like there's just this big part where like Patrick, he's screaming, like he has this very open and like angry pose. And I can just never associate that scene with anything but like hearing out of Patrick's mouth, like, weren't you gonna break our bond, Sasuke?
Yeah, that's I think I've seen that bit before. I'm not a huge Naruto guy, but I think I've seen
I
that
have
meme
never fucking watched
specifically.
Naruto in my life.
Yeah, that's fair. But yeah, but that the actual contents of that scene are like Sandy's like clearly hamming it up, acting, trying to like act like, oh, we're having this delicious meal of Krabby Patties. But then Patrick is like barely holding it together, and Sandy has to be like, "Read your lines, Patrick." And
And Patrick he reads the stage
he reads the
directions. He's
stage
like,
directions, so he's like,
well,
"Take
thank
Patty,
you, Sandy. I
take
would
Patty."
love one. Takes Patty. Too bad SpongeBob isn't here. These are his favorite. Take bite of Patty.
And then yeah, well then he's like goes take bite, and at this point he's like barely holding it together. He's like shaking, and then he starts screaming, and he can't take the bite. He cannot take the bite of the Krabby Patty, and he just starts screaming for SpongeBob to come back. And then at this point, Sandy has to drag him away. Or well, SpongeBob is like, "No, I love it here," even though so far he's not really had that positive an experience. But whatever. But yeah, Sandy has to drag Patrick away.
He broke their bond on a whim, nothing more. And Patrick, he's sitting there and he's like, I miss you, Sandy misses you, even Squidward misses you. And we get a quick cut to Squidward's house where he's just like partying. He's
Yeah.
like just he could not be more ecstatic about the situation. And so yes, then Sandy does drag Patrick away, and SpongeBob he goes back into jellyfish fields. He's still trying to be a jellyfish, but it's really not going super well because he's not a jellyfish. And eventually, it just becomes really weird because Patrick shows up again with the jellyfish net which SpongeBob gave him. And there's this broken sounding music box in the background to create this kind of like jarring horror vibe. And he's like, if I can't have you as a friend, I'll have you as a trophy. And he pulls out this jar with SpongeBob's name on it. And like he's chasing SpongeBob's running around. He's like, you're gonna look good on my mantle. And like
Oh fuck.
it's just this incredibly like violent, like horror movie
Yeah.
style chase
It's
where
so good.
Patrick has just completely lost himself and like desires to own SpongeBob.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and this so during this chase, there's a moment where SpongeBob runs like between this like arch thing like of rocks, and it's important to note that this is the tired naked SpongeBob meme where he's like naked leaning up against a rock. That's a very popular one that's been going around recently. So that's where that image is from. And then yeah, and then Patrick is like above on top of like he's like stuck to the top because starfish can cling to things. He's like on top of the rock and he pounces down on SpongeBob to try to catch him, but then SpongeBob eventually escapes by climbing into essentially a beehive because this show really like kind of gives jellyfish like every different role possible. So in this episode they're treating them like bumblebees, and they kind of always have like a bumblebee sort of thing going on with like the jelly and all that stuff. But like yeah, this one they just I don't think we ever see them live in beehives at any point before this or after this, but in this episode that's what they're doing.
it's been one of those things where there's sort of a stand-in for like any kind of insect really, in that they are like SpongeBob is kind of catching bugs. It's kind of like an entomology style of thing where the idea of like these nets is like a butterfly net, but yeah, they are treated more like bees more often than not. So there is like it's like a literal beehive, but it's what I would call a jellyfish hive because that's what lives there. And Patrick, like you see him try and ineffectively jump up and swing at it more times than I feel like a normal person would have to realize they can't get up there.
Yeah.
And then Patrick, he finally gives up. He's crying. He breaks the net, and he just finally leaves. And so SpongeBob, he's like, he takes a breath. He finally feels like he's safe, and then he starts eating the jelly in the hive. And when the jellyfish come back, he's like, "Oh hey," but
Hello,
they
brothers.
obviously know this is not a jellyfish. And so much like bees, they sting him as he tries to flee because he just invaded their space and ate their jelly. Um, so basically, nothing's really worked out for him this entire time, and now it's night. He's trying to sleep in nature, but it's really cold. And then he pulls up this basically like it's like a skirt almost of grass. It's like just a couple like
It's
leaves,
like a big
sort of. I'm not
patch of
really sure
seaweed.
actually what.
It's like seaweed, I think it's supposed to be technically, but it's like a big
Yeah, but
like
I'm not sure what you'd call like a patch of seaweed. I don't know what the
yeah.
actual word for that
I'm not
be,
sure.
but in one way or another, he pulls it up on himself and he starts itching because it's covered in urchins, and he calls them poison urchins, which is
Poison
it's
seaweed.
weird because I think of it as like he's being covered in ticks or something, but also calling them poison urchins makes me think, is this supposed to be like poison ivy? Because they are clearly bugs. They're drawn like bugs,
Yeah.
but they seem to be playing multiple roles here, and so he's trying to scratch them off. He's running around, and he basically just starts like sadly he heads back into town and he's thinking about all the things he's missing. Like he passes the Krusty Krab, he passes Sandy's place, and then when he finally gets back to his house, basically them all knowing he was not going to last the night were in his house ready to throw him a surprise party. So Mr. Krabs is there, Sandy, Patrick Squidward. Um, and so basically like he hugs Squidward and then everyone else makes it into a group hug. But then the problem is like he was covered in sea urchins, so now they are all also itchy.
Patrick Itchy.
Yes, and as a throwback, Patrick, he does yell that as well, which is weird because it's like in character, Patrick reads stage lines in this episode, but also Patrick Sad and Patrick Itchy come off as though they would be like real world stage lines that were read.
Yeah.
And so it creates this situation where it's like, I wonder if those were directions or lines, or like if he just decided to make them lines. But either way, it is definitely a humorous little bit there, and it's just really it just does something SpongeBob likes to do, which is it takes a concept that's very normal, but SpongeBob and his enthusiasm hypes it into something else and kind of misunderstands it.
Yeah.
Because returning to nature is a little bit different. I mean, ultimately, it kind of has the same results for a lot of people, where you realize we're almost like it's like when you take a domesticated animal from like the zoo or something and you try and throw it back into nature, you can't do that. It's
Yeah.
going to die.
Mhm.
Humans have domesticated themselves. A lot of us cannot go back to nature. We cannot do that. It would take a lot of time and a lot of like fortitude and training to actually survive those kinds of things. So when people say that and people try it, I've never seen anyone actually stick to it. They always end up coming right back to where they started and realizing, yeah, I can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and no, and this episode definitely has a lot of good bits and stuff like that in it. The one thing that I feel like it's kind of missing weirdly is like there's no I don't really see any reason because we know SpongeBob to be a very like yeah, he loves his job, he loves his friends, all that stuff. I feel like there should have been some sort of reason why he feels this way, like why he wants to do this other than him just having like a dream at the start of the episode and then like he just wants to do this. Like I don't know, it's not that big a deal, you know. It is a kids cartoon at the end of the day, but I feel like a lot of other SpongeBob episodes that do something similar that just kind of run with the concept usually have some sort of like inciting incident and like an overall lesson for the. It's like I mean the lessons kind of it's like hey don't live in nature kids, but like I don't know or nature isn't as friendly as you might think or whatever, but like I don't know. I feel like there should have been some sort of like inciting thing for him to want to do this. Like maybe he was just like overwhelmed with his job and like everyone was annoying him or whatever, and then he realizes, oh hey, it's actually not that bad. Living in nature is just a lot worse or something like that. I don't know. I feel like it. I feel like it's just kind of missing that for me.
It is kind of a strange whim because it's something where for him to have the kind of reactions he has, it's like this desire that we've never seen out of him before trumps his desire to work at the Krusty Krab, which was always his dream and is something he still does enjoy. Like we never see him get tired of that job. That's something he's always wanted and something he enjoys doing. Yet this whim that we're only just now hearing about now, like it trumps not only his job but his relationships to his friends, and to some extent, it almost feels like it is like kind of a childish whim, and like it doesn't really feel like he's fully thought out what those things mean or like what it would mean to go into nature. And in that sense, to some extent, I can see it, but also it's almost like it's something where if Mr. Krabs hadn't laughed at him in the beginning, I don't think he would have ended up taking it as far. But at that point, it became like a personal thing. It was like he was told he couldn't do something he wanted to and laughed at, and so he was like, "Okay, now I'm going to actually do it."
I don't know. I think
Um,
he kind of just wanted to do it because I feel like they would have made that a bit clearer then that that's why. I think he did like I think that was just his intention because he was saying that to Mr. Krabs. He was saying like I want to leave and go live in nature, but like that when he did that before he laughed at him. Like I don't know. I think this is again that's why I'm saying like I think there should have been some sort of like like some sort of thing where we got the reason why he feels he wants to do this. It didn't have to be like a big thing. I feel like we didn't necessarily need that little like opening dream thing. I think they could have replaced that like a minute or so, or it wasn't really a minute, but like that little bit with like something that happened that made him feel that way. But I mean, you know, I'm not a screenwriter or whatever, but and it's not that big a deal. It's just something I thought of while watching it.
that is true, but like the perspective I'm trying to come at it with is like we've had this discussion before where it's like, when you're like living at home and you start cleaning and then your parents are like, it's a mess clean, and your thought is like, well, now I am not going to do it.
Yeah,
And it's like SpongeBob was like, I want to do this, and Mr. Krabs was like, that's a ridiculous idea, essentially. And he was like, well, now I am going to do it.
yeah,
It's
that's
like
fair.
that might be like a thought process that like even though he wanted it, that was kind of one of those like motivators to it. But again, it really, yeah, it isn't clear, honestly, where this comes from or why it's such a strong feeling. Because I mean, we've seen him hunt jellyfish before, but he's never had the desire to like be with them. Like when one tried to be his pet, he tried to make it clear that like its place is in nature and his place is here, and those are two different places. But it just seems like I don't know. It was just something he wanted this episode, and it's not entirely out of his realm of interests. So maybe it was just a really poorly thought out whim, and he went too far with it. But one way or another, when we get past it at the end of the day, like for whatever reason, that's what he wanted, and that's what it led to. So
Yep.
the overall episode doesn't feel the events don't feel hampered by the lack of explanation. Like the inciting incident might feel a little hampered by it, but other than that, there are still ultimately good bits in it. Which maybe maybe that's part of why. Like there's a lot of bits in this that are remembered, but the episode itself isn't really talked about as much.
Yeah, it's the story of this one. You kind of just remember SpongeBob's in nature, and that's about it. Like, yeah, and then you remember the bits. So it's not that big of a deal. Just the situations. The situation leads to some funny outcomes, and yeah, I do kind of like your interpretation of like it's a childish whim doing something. Like there's like a video that went viral recently of like some girl, like she's like 6 or 7 or something, and she's like, I'm running away from home, and she gets like halfway down the block, and then she comes like crying running back to the house. Like kids will just do stuff that's like, all right, I'm leaving, I'm never coming home, and then they just realize, oh my god, what am I going to do? So
See, the only issue with that is to relate a personal story to it. There was a time when like I got in a fight with my mom, and this was like I was in like high school, and like I was not this was not me running away, but I was like, okay, you're clearly not making this better. I'm going to leave and I'm gonna come back later. And I got in my car and I left, and like I think I went to McDonald's, and like 20 minutes later she called me. She's like, "Did you actually leave? I didn't think you were gonna do it." And it's like I took the most mature stance to the argument I could take. And I tried to have an active like work through this like solution to it. But like no, it's because like I never did that as a kid. I never had those like I'm going to run away moments. I was like, if I try to run away, I'm fully aware of what the risks of doing that are.
yeah.
Um and so I never did that. And it's like when she was like, "You actually left," I was like, "Yeah, I told you I was going to. I was very clear about that." But no, like when younger kids do it, it's like obviously they can't actually go too far.
Yeah.
Now, kind of moving on to 9B, Opposite Day. This was written by Chuck Klein, Jay Lender, and Mr. Lawrence, then storyboarded by Chuck Klein and Jay Lender. This is one where some of the bits are remembered, but the existence of the bits reminds you of their context, so you know what the gist of the episode is. It's like when you hear SpongeBob be like, "I'm Squidward," it's like you remember why he is Squidward.
Yeah, I didn't
Um,
remember the I mean, obviously we'll get into this, but I didn't remember the whole Squidward trying to sell his house angle to this episode. But I did remember a lot of the specific bits. So it's again, I think this one and the last episode, it's weird how like they do seem to pair episodes together really well. Because again, this one and the last one, it's like you don't really need to worry about like kind of the story of what's going on in the background, just kind of like the main concept and then the bits that come from that, which is I mean that's perfectly fine.
And it is something where I'm not sure if like they pair well because one was made than the other, or if they were curated like that by the network. Because I'm not entirely sure. Because some of the times when like you try and look up the actual the ID numbers and whatnot associated with episodes, they seem kind of out of order. So it's like I have no idea how exactly that worked out, but one way or another, it certainly seems to work out in that one episode. In one way or another, generally will either like contrast in a positive way or complement the other episode with it. There's never a time where it's like too jarring, except for there's times where like I said, Marine Man and Barnacle Boy was not an episode that I liked, but if you paired that with anything, I would still think that that was off just because it is so different from anything else that exists, at that exact time. Um, However, to get more into this episode and to get back on track with that, so basically, at the start of this, it very first opens up with Squidward. He's sleeping, but we can kind of hear like Patrick and SpongeBob like giggling, and we see that they had hidden in Squidward's bed to throw him a birthday party, and so they're hanging out and they keep singing Happy Birthday and doing all these activities, and then they leave, and Squidward like yells at them, "It's not my birthday," and he clearly did not even want them there. So he basically decides like this is the final straw. I'm moving, and he contacts a realtor, which I think is weird. And my reasoning for that is this: so we look at their houses and their communities, and it's very clear that the living spaces of these creatures are things that fell to the undersea from the world above, and it just kind of feels like they found these things and they live in them. Like no one was like, I'm going to have this house built. I'm paying to have this house built. I'm moving. I'm going to sell this house. Like that is not the process. However, there is apparently, according to this episode, a realty industry where people do buy and sell homes. However, it still does seem really weird even on top of that because Squidward, his actions in this episode lead to the thought that the realtor sees the house once and then you leave and it's done. um, which is weird because it's definitely not how that process
Well,
works.
yeah. So what his concern is the realtor says, like, the realtor like sees like his house listing or whatever, and is like, oh my gosh, Mr. Squidward, this is a beautiful house. I should be able to sell this no problem. Not unless he got like not unless he got like a infestation of some kind or annoying neighbors. And he's like, no, of course I don't have anything like that. But when really we know that because the reason why he wants to move is because of his neighbors. He definitely does have that, and he's like, and then the realtor's like, yeah, if you had annoying neighbors, I'd never be able to sell this house. So obviously he freaks out. But yeah, and so his whole plan is to try to get SpongeBob. He's like, I'm never gonna be able to sell this house, and so he wants to convince SpongeBob and Patrick that it's opposite day, so that they will act opposite to what they usually do, which is loud and annoying. So then they won't be annoying on the day that the realtor comes. But yeah, as Kurt was just saying, that won't be the only time that the realtor shows up, and there will most definitely be other instances during the selling of the house process where SpongeBob and Patrick will have plenty of an opportunity to be annoying and scare off any potential buyers.
The housing situation and the lore of housing in Bikini Bottom is very vague and very played with, and is whatever episodes want it to be. Which I guess works in the sense that when I was a child, I didn't know how realty worked. I didn't know any of these things. I never even thought about it. So I guess it's fine, especially for its intended audience. But it is something where it's like, as an adult who has moved and has like gotten apartments and had to go like looking for places to stay, it's a lot more involved than this is going to lead you to believe when you're a child. But one way or another, after that happens, so it's the next day. Squidward, he's out and about. He's got a drum. He's playing a drum. And SpongeBob's like, "Why are you doing that?" And he's like, "This isn't a drum. This is my wig case." And he like rips it, and there's a fucking wig inside. And then SpongeBob's reaction is, "Squidward, you need bed rest."
And then yeah, and then Squidward explains to him that no, you silly, it's opposite day, and he essentially gaslights SpongeBob into believing that there's this holiday called Opposite Day that everyone knows, and it's the day where you act opposite. Um,
And so what Squidward says too, I think, is important. He's like, normally you're loud and annoying, so today, what are you gonna be? Quiet and out of the way. And like he just screams that as he's running into his house as well.
yeah, he is very excited for Opposite Day. There's like times where like he does like he goes like, I hate Opposite Day. He just like a little giggle and stuff. Like he's very excited.
And then
S-
when he's talking to Gary, and I think we've said this before, like, it's a pet snail that's basically like a cat. So Gary goes meow, and SpongeBob says to him, "Where's your holiday spirit?" So he barks instead.
Woof. That's such a good bit. I love that one so much. But then yeah, we see him do a couple other things. And then Patrick knocks at the door, and again, SpongeBob, thinking that it's opposite day, goes in and
Go
says,
away! I never want to see you again.
and then Patrick just starts crying. SpongeBob doesn't like me anymore.
I just the imagery out of context is so good because SpongeBob is sitting there smiling while Patrick is crying. He's like, "That's right, you're my worst enemy."
Yeah, then Patrick has no idea. So then SpongeBob starts explaining it to him, and then Patrick goes, "Opposite day, I've heard of that. Really? No, what is it?" And then he explains it to him. And Patrick goes, "Ooh, let me try." And then he starts holding his breath until he turns blue, which
The
is
opposite of what he normally
yes,
does.
it's the opposite. That is, I think that is that and like the Gary bit are two one of my favorite bits from this from this episode. Him just let me try, and he just starts not breathing is so good.
There is a lot of bits now that come up where SpongeBob is trying to essentially teach Patrick what opposites are,
Mhm.
and we get this whole like visual montage where like their colors are opposite each other. There's a part where they speak backwards, and if you flip it, what they say is like, "Hey Patrick, I give up to get to the opposite side," and it's like I think the opening of that joke was missed somewhere in there because there's no setup to that. But that's what they say. There's a bit though specifically I want to talk about. So we see Gary eating very fine dining, and then SpongeBob eating pet food. Then we cut Patrick is sitting on newspaper on the floor,
And he just says
and
meow.
Patrick's idea of opposite is shitting on the floor apparently, because that's the implication of that with the newspapers on the
Well, I think
floor.
it's like I think the idea is like like so Gary is eating like SpongeBob and vice versa, and so Patrick is shitting like Gary. I think is the implication there.
That's well, I think yeah, because if he was just sitting on newspapers, I wouldn't have thought anything of it. But it's very specifically placed after the Gary bit, so
Yeah,
that you can visually comprehend that that is what he is doing,
yeah,
and it's okay. I guess that's opposite of what a normal human being would do. Yeah,
yeah. And there's one where they get blown into bubbles and Patrick pops, which I mean, sure, why not?
it
Um,
wouldn't be the first time they killed a sentient bubble. Well, it would be the first, but it wouldn't be the only.
it would not. So at some point it goes too far, and Squidward looks out his window. He's like thinking my plan worked so well. I haven't heard a peep out of SpongeBob and Patrick all day. This is great. But then he hears a ton of racket, and he looks out his window and he sees that SpongeBob is destroying his house because what would you do if you were living in a house on opposite day? You would destroy it. So Squidward being like, "Holy God, this has backfired. They're never going to sell my house if their house next to me is destroyed, or being destroyed." So he goes over it and starts fixing it, and then SpongeBob has this whole like mental loop where it's like, "But Squidward is fixing my house, but that means he's ruining it because but that means he would be fixing it. But then if I stopped him, then I would." And I guess he goes through this whole thing, and he gets like actually physically wrapped up in his arms and legs. And then this leads him to the conclusion that Squidward is being the opposite of SpongeBob is Squidward, so I have to be Squidward. So he
And
takes off his belt and wraps it around his face to mimic Squidward's head.
and I do think one thing that I'd like to point out was when Squidward first sees that. So, and I think the reason he's doing it is because like, instead of renovating his house, he's destroying it.
Yeah,
And what Squidward says is, "SpongeBob, you're the worst neighbor in history." And so SpongeBob just talks to himself. He's like, "Wow, that's the nicest thing Squidward has ever said to me."
yeah.
And basically, after they do that, there's an exchange where it's like SpongeBob and Patrick are talking like, "Isn't it beautiful?" On opposite day, it is. Uh, and so anyway, yeah. So Squidward is trying to fix the house, like you said, and I think the exact logic loop is SpongeBob is like, "Squidward is cleaning my house, which means he's actually messing it up. But normally I'd mess up my own house, meaning that Squidward is being SpongeBob, meaning that SpongeBob must need to be Squidward." And so then I think Patrick says something like, "I want to be Squidward too," and he like puts a pickle on his nose. He's like, "I'm Squidward, I'm Squidward, I'm Squidward, Squidward, Squidward," and SpongeBob corrects him like, "You also have to act like Squidward." "Oh, okay. I'm Squidward, I'm Squidward, I'm Squidward,
Yeah, and
Squidward,
then
Squidward."
but then SpongeBob.
Squidward's catchphrase, you see.
Yeah, well, and then SpongeBob joins in with him too, though. But before that, he tries to teach him how to actually be Squidward, and so he says, "Boy, oh boy, do I like playing the clarinet! I practice and practice all day long, but never get any better." Which is just a giant self burn or a giant burn on Squidward. Or well, it's weird because the way he's acting like Squidward, because it's this whole confusing mess where he's being opposite by being Squidward, but then later he's being Squidward, also being the opposite of Squid. It's just a lot of layers of opposites going on here. But then yeah, SpongeBob and Patrick, being Squidward, go into Squidward's house while he's fixing up SpongeBob's house. And at that time, the realtor arrives, and so SpongeBob is like, "Oh, opposite day. I have to." So he's like, "Let me show you everything this house has to offer," but instead shows him like the worst rooms, and just like the floor creaks, the ceiling leaks, and there's a terrible draft. He just completely shit talks the house in every way imaginable.
It's because yeah, he's thinking like, "Oh, positive things. That means negative things today." And one of the things he takes her, the realtor, up to Squidward's art room, and she's like, "Oh, this is a beautiful painting." And then Patrick bursts through it and like, "Thank you. We're both Squidward."
I'm
And basically
Squidward. He's Squidward. We're both Squidward.
she's willing to accept that at this moment, but then we cut back to Squidward noticing, like as he's cleaned up SpongeBob's house, that the realtor's gotten there. And when we get back in, like they're essentially holding her hostage, and SpongeBob is poorly playing the clarinet, and she's like, I don't want to hear another." "Oh, I gotcha." And so he keeps playing, and she's like, I really don't want to hear another." And he's like, "Loud and clear."
Loud and
And
clear.
he's basically just torturing this woman and like not
but
respecting her wishes
but on
because he
accident.
misunderstands the day. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And
And
so
so
yeah. So the real Squidward comes in, and he's like, "I am so sorry. These are two like these are idiots. Do not listen to them." And she's like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "I'm Squidward." And then at this point, she completely snaps because this is the third Squidward that she's met. So she just goes, he's Squidward, he's Squidward, you're Squidward. Are there any other Squidwards I should know about? And then Gary shows up wearing a pickle on his nose, meow, in like the Squidward voice, and she's like, "All right, I'm out of here."
She
And
just at that point, it's like she is really disgruntled, and I think that she thinks she's just being disrespected and taken for a ride
yes,
because it's like,
absolutely.
okay, this is like the face she makes tells everything you need to know about what she's feeling.
Hmm.
But the true Squidward, Squidward original, he's basically like, tugging on her leg and is like, please, like he's begging her to sell the
Please sell
house.
my house.
But that when she leaves, he's just like sitting there defeated. And SpongeBob and Patrick come up to him and are like, happy opposite day, Squidward. We
We
hate
hate
you.
you. Oh god. Yeah, that is a pretty solid episode revisiting it. It's got a lot of funny bits. It's not, again, like both of these episodes are just like decently solid. Like, there's a few very good bits in there, but it's just like it's a solid string of the funnies throughout, I would say.
It can be very easy to forget what the inciting incident is because the inciting incident is almost like window dressing to the true start of events, so to
Mhm.
speak. Like in this case, it's like the episode is about it being opposite day more than it's about Squidward trying to sell his house. The episode is more about SpongeBob trying to be a jellyfish more than him like deciding to leave society behind. I mean, they're kind of tied together, but there's a nuance in the difference.
Mhm.
And so it's one of those things where it makes it easier to remember pieces rather than the overall whole. But I do think that the multiple Squidwards does tie back in kind of the base idea of what the episode's about. But I think people don't remember it's a realtor necessarily that was asking those questions
Yeah.
because it could just be anyone. It could be anyone, and they'd be in like an equally bad situation by like being taken hostage by SpongeBob and Patrick.
Yeah.
Uh,
And again, and this episode specifically, harkens back to the episode formula that we've seen a bunch of times now, where Squidward kind of, has to take his own medicine at the end of it. But again, as with a couple, because again, at the beginning, it's normally Squidward being an asshole, and he is kind of being an asshole here. But like, it's kind of valid. Like, SpongeBob and Patrick did break into his home and wish him happy birthday, like in the middle of the night, not even on his birthday, and are like such a nuisance that he can't even sell his home. Like that, I mean, as much as he is, like he does maybe take it too far on occasion, he's not entirely wrong here.
It's one of those things where I kind of went back and forth about that thought, where in my head I was thinking, like, does this break the normal chain of karma as it works in the series? And ultimately, my take on it was no, because um, the actions that cause Squidward's downfall are his own. And so it is coming back to him in a way where, whether or not it's entirely fair, that still fits the broader sense of karma as it's been experienced so far. And in some other senses too, because I do feel like it's not entirely fair, but it's not like Squidward said, like, I need you to like behave or play inside or something. It was
Yeah,
like,
he didn't
I'm
even
going to
ask them.
actively
Yeah,
deceive my neighbors and
yeah.
hope that they're not smart enough to recognize the deception.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, it's very the inciting incident. I would say he's very justified in, but his methodology that he goes about it. And there's been a couple. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head. I can't remember what the I don't know. There's been like an episode or two where also like I kind of had a similar vibe, but again, it's that thing of Squidward just takes it too far and doesn't actually like try to communicate what he actually wants. Instead, he just like does something mean, and and it comes back to bite him.
and another thing is, it does feel different in that, like, to go back to Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy again, because that was the episode where really I stated that as a problem.
Hmm.
Is SpongeBob is naively malicious, but he is malicious. Here, it's like I wouldn't even call SpongeBob's actions malicious. They're a hindrance, but like he's not actively tormenting someone. He has a misunderstanding of what he's communicating.
Yeah,
And again,
he thinks
if
he's
you
doing what he's supposed to be doing.
and if you're going in blind, the nuance of that might be lost. It might sound like it's the same thing. But if you were to watch both of those episodes back to back, I think it would be kind of clear what I'm saying, that there's a difference in perspective and in reasoning that is created where I don't feel like it's a problem here.
No.
A lot of things here are like, very much like extreme cartoony factor, but it isn't to any detriment in any way. And so I do think overall, I do enjoy Opposite Day a little more than Nature Pants because although we've said, both of them, like their inciting incidents are a little irrelevant, um, I think Opposite Day is trying to do more.
Yeah.
And I think it pans out a little bit better
Yeah,
overall.
I mean,
But
I
both
think
of
it
them
has more
have
of a
like
complete story,
moments.
like versus Opposite Day or versus Nature Pants, and I think it has some of the funnier bits as well.
Because with Nature Pants too, like Nature Pants just kind of ends. Like
Yeah.
it just sort of like SpongeBob spends the whole episode saying no to coming back, but then everyone like still expected him to come back the night anyway, and he does. And it's like it just feels like obviously he wasn't going to be able to live in nature, and everyone knew that, but it doesn't feel like there was a real arc there. As opposed to here, where it's like we see the escalation of Opposite Day, meaning that he's Squidward, and how that ends up impacting the overall like initial inciting incident and how it ties itself back into that. Um, and so I would say I think that as a whole package, Opposite Day does have that over Nature Pants. But like we've said, both of them do have good bits. They have memorable bits that people have used for multiple different things and that people surely do remember because they are using them in meme templates and whatnot. But overall, not the worst, but again, not like, top of the top episode either. Just solid good.
Yep. I agree. So, do you have anything else to add?
On these, not really. I think we've pretty much covered everything. I guess if there's one more thing I had to say, both of these episodes do have some instances of very creative visuals. Like we have the whole
Hmm.
like SpongeBob absorbing the water, becoming large, and then being in the ground, becoming small and scraped up by Mr. Krabs in Nature Pants. And then the whole like SpongeBob and Patrick doing opposite things montage in Opposite Day also has like a lot of interesting visual things going on. So that element's definitely here too. We didn't really talk about it this time because there's honestly been a fair number of episodes where that wasn't where like they might have played with visuals, but it wasn't standout. But these ones, it's like, yeah, I noticed it, and so I feel like that's another good thing to note. But with that, yeah, that would be all my thoughts on episode 9. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be with you again next week.
Have a good one, everyone.